Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the rest of you. We are back for another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. It is I, your host Q, coming to you yet again from my mother's basement, and I'm joined by my co-host P. How's it going, P?
Going quite well. Quite well.
And we have a special guest today who wrote a fascinating article out of based on the data coming out of China and the fact that hash rate may or may not be coming out of China yet again. P, do you want to introduce Zach?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Zach, I always appreciate your work. My understanding, you started your career as an analyst for Masari, and then you were at Blockstream as a technical writer. Working on the Liquid network and things like that, Green Wallet. Then you moved over to CoinDesk, and now you are focused on exclusively on the Bitcoin mining industry. And you've had articles and tweets published in New York Times, Financial Times, The Independent, and additional ones. What would
Yeah, yeah, that's that's a pretty good rundown. It covers all the bases there. My journey through the space has sort of started like general crypto stuff, and then professionally narrowed more to Bitcoin. Bitcoin was always, my primary like individual focus. But it can be sometimes harder to find, a good job with a good team in Bitcoin instead of as opposed to the broader crypto industry. I was lucky enough to work with a couple of great teams in Bitcoin. Then I spent some time covering Bitcoin market structure and mining at CoinDesk, and then sort of went even narrower into the Bitcoin mining rabbit hole briefly through Compass, and now I spend most of my time with the Brains team, who are, obviously some of the best out there. So I'm lucky to be working with them on a bunch of stuff.
Zach, I'm curious if there's anything, from your past that you want to touch on or highlight that you're really proud of, or that people who may not be as familiar with your work that you'd point to them and have them check out.
That's an interesting question. So the last bear market was probably like one of the seminal times for like Bitcoin podcasting, I guess. You had, just dozens of Bitcoin podcasts. And I joined the fray for a bit. I used to host a podcast, just interviewing people I thought were cool and, building cool stuff during the throes of depressed Bitcoin market. I don't do that anymore. That's been stopped for a while, but I think we got, to like 30 or 40 solid episodes. It used to be called the Coin Pod, just a random side project. Those people, I guess, probably recognize or know me, if they do recognize or know me at all, from some of the shit posting I do on Twitter, which, that has its pros and cons, I guess. Like Pete mentioned, some of those tweets have made it into articles published by mainstream news outlets, which I guess is kind of fun and probably not great all at the same time. But I also try to like write longer form thoughts to sort of balance out the rankest shit posting. And you guys, Bitcoin Magazine, are more than kind to give me a platform to publish some of that stuff. Shout out to Pete also on editorial, who takes all my drafts and gives me cool headlines and all that stuff. Some of the people over at CoinDesk I used to write with, no, I'm terrible at writing headlines. So thanks, Pete, for always giving me cool ideas.
Shout out Chihuahua, you the man. Zach, the topic that we wanted to really dive into is your most recent article that you wrote for Bitcoin Magazine. I've thrown it in the chat over on YouTube, and we'll share it with the Rumble and Twitch fam as well if you haven't already. And I'm just gonna make sure I get the actual title of the article proper, but it is why we can't trust hash rate data from China. Do you want to maybe tee up some of the data that you're talking about before we really dive into the meat of this?
Yeah, for sure. I guess maybe a good place to start is like why we talk about mining in China at all. I can sometimes, get lost. Bitcoin mining can kind of be a bubble inside of a Bitcoin bubble onto its own sometimes. And historically, the idea is China has always been like the hub for mining in the world in two key ways. One, actual manufacturing of Bitcoin mining hardware, and also too for like the use of that hardware, for the actual hash rate coming online, and minting new bitcoins through block rewards, and adding new blocks to the blockchain, processing transactions, all those duties that miners have. And those two things are sort of related. The proximity to where all the machines are made, it sort of makes sense, that a bulk of the hash rate sort of also lives there. And for years, most of Bitcoin's history, that was always kind of a thorn in the side of the Bitcoin economy, I guess. Endless articles, at least one or two a quarter would come out, and endless like secular fiat prominent personalities, and also, outspoken, just sort of joker clowns in the crypto industry, like leadership from Ripple particularly, but always cite, China's control and death grip on the Bitcoin industry because of how much hash rate is located there. So don't need to ramble on that forever, I guess. But that's the premise why people care about China so much in mining. And China has, sort of limited and restricted and sort of banned Bitcoin mining and crypto generally, and transactions and all these sorts of things multiple times over the history of Bitcoin. Like I think at least a dozen different times. But last May was sort of the biggest and most significant ban of Bitcoin mining sort of throughout the whole country. And the market reacted very quickly and very significantly, as sort of price very quickly fell. And over like about a month period, we saw hash rate, a lot of hash rate go offline, as miners, were in China, were legally required to sort of unplug and relocate their machines. And since then, those miners, some of them have relocated, and other new miners have come online, and we've rebounded, we meaning hash rate. But that was a pretty seminal event in like the history of Bitcoin, because a massive amount of hash rate that had sat in one geographic location for most of Bitcoin's history was, officially banned and forced to either just stay offline or relocate somewhere else if it wanted to come back online. Yeah, that's the premise, I guess. So, the big question now is like, okay, so where is all this hash rate? And people, some more serious academics than I am, but also, people like me who just like to monitor this stuff, love to analyze trends and growth and changes in the network like this. And that was a pretty significant trend. And analyzing, the event itself, and then, the aftershocks of it is pretty interesting stuff. If assuming that we can actually measure and gauge, the event itself and its size and impact and the aftershocks of it, and that measuring the event and its aftershocks is, kind of why we're having this conversation today. Like, what data do, or I guess don't, we have available to us, and how reliable is or isn't it? And kind of addressing a prominent, data set that's been referenced a lot, that comes out of Cambridge's Center for Alternative Finance, is, the thrust of the article that I wrote, and, what it touches on, and some of the problems that I think are pretty apparent with, too heavily relying on that data. I guess one thing I should say is this, I didn't just like sort of write this article, out of spite because I didn't like their data, which I don't particularly like their data. But the main motivation for me writing this is because back in May, when all this hash rate came offline, you would see, like, I saw so many articles saying like there's no hash rate in China. And they would cite, because at the time, Cambridge updated their mining data to say China has 0% of Bitcoin's hash rate. And everyone thought, wow, that's an explosive number. And if it's true, it is, or if it were true. And there were so many headlines about it. And now, fast forward to present day, Cambridge updated their data again and said, like, China has somewhere a couple percent over 20% of Bitcoin's hash rate. Just again, poof, it's back. And both of those events, like the 0% and then poof, 20% is back, just sort of really irritated me because, and I know I'm not the only one in the mining community, because miners know that's not true. People who work for mining companies, and many of those individuals have said publicly that's not true. But this data was, paraded around by many journalists, and I don't think it's, sort of gotten its fair refutation and rebuttal. And that's, I'll stop reacting now, sorry, but that's, why I wanted to write this article. So hopefully that sort of distillizes or it crystallizes, distills why we're talking about China and hash rate and the particular data set that I don't really care for.
No, to be honest with you, towards the end of this conversation, maybe once we wrap up the conversation over the article, I'm going to go down that rabbit hole of like the question of should a nation state actually have, or within its borders, have 50% of the hash rate. But until then, let's dive deeper into this data, because you introduced two fundamental issues with the data. A, there was never 0% hash rate in China, and then B, the data that they're collecting is just faulty to begin with. I'll kind of let you choose your own adventure here, and which side of this coin do you want to talk about first?
Yeah, for sure. I think, well, let's talk about like never 0% first, I guess. That maybe makes the most sense. And, to Cambridge's Center for Alternative Finance, the CCAF's credit, like they're always very careful to report their analysis and data as, China's reported share of hash rate. And that reporting comes from a small group of miners that sort of submits data to Cambridge, and Cambridge also checks the IP addresses of the miners producing the hash rate or managing the hash rate, that's sort of included in their research. And based on that sliver of data, Cambridge saw, okay, there's 0% hash rate in China. Lots of problems with that we can talk to next. But the reason why there was never, or like the reason we know there was never 0% is because I guess prima facie, like miners are pretty resilient, I guess. So this may be sort of like a philosophical or existential argument. But you kind of have to at least assume that there's like 1 or 2% of Bitcoin's hash rate, like anywhere, any like country, I guess, or even like continent, because of the economic incentives and utility of mining, and especially with over like nearly 50%, I guess at some points over 50% of Bitcoin's hash rate in China, like within a month, it's not going to drop to zero. That's just a logistical impossibility. But that's sort of like a weaker point. The stronger point is that miners knew it was not zero, and many of them said so publicly. In the article, I linked to a couple tweets from, well, it's on Twitter, so I don't want to I guess I can already name them. But Kevin over at Foundry, like one of the most well-connected, most insightful people in the Bitcoin mining industry, was like just said, no, this is not the case. Another sort of non-mining specific researchers pointed out problems with this data. I chimed in a bit, but case in point, like the point is that miners knew there was a non-zero amount of hash rate in China, and Cambridge addressed these like claims, in some of their articles or blog posts about the data that they published, and they just basically dismissed them as too difficult to verify. Which I guess sort of begs the question, like if your data set relies on verifying hash rate geographic location with miners, and miners are telling you your data is inaccurate, then maybe it's not difficulty, maybe it's a process error. So yeah, I guess that's all there is to say really about 0% hash rate in China. People knew it was greater than zero and said so. And on Twitter, I'll give the researchers their credit. On Twitter, they said, because in the article I say these claims weren't taken, seriously, which I think is, a pretty fair characterization. They didn't like that characterization on Twitter. They said so after I published the article. But I think if they did take them seriously, they would have worked to either adjust their data set at the time that they're reporting 0% hash rate in China, adjust their methodology, maybe. Or do any number of other things differently, and based on the fact that they didn't and still reported 0%, even though other miners said that's not the case, that leads me to conclude they didn't take them as seriously as they should have. So yeah, there never was 0% hash rate in China, and there still isn't. Probably never will be. I think that's a pretty safe bet.
Why do you think that they chose to do that? Do you think that they are acting in good faith, or do you feel like it was a kind of willful ignorance?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't want to pretend, to kind of know what their thinking is on this point. And I definitely think they are, acting in reasonably good faith. Like I doubt they're sitting there going through the process of compiling this data from some of the miners that contribute to them, like in an effort to deliberately misinform the Bitcoin community. But I think it's more akin to something like pop science instead of arduous academic research. Even though I know the process of collecting this data is not simple, even though it is broken, which may be part of the reason why it's not simple. But I don't think any of this was malicious or anything like that. It's just as I explained a little bit later in the article, it was also very convenient, like it fit the narrative. And some of this is not all on them, it's on the miners who are also miners. Some of these miners were operating in what was previously one of the largest destinations or locations of hash rate in the world, and now the most aggressively anti-mining locations in the world. So why would they report any mining activity whatsoever in this area? And part of the problem is that Cambridge has very few, if any, good checks on the data that they're receiving. And the other part is, Cambridge has this data, they're following their rules and methodology. They come to, the data gets spit out, and 0% hash rate fits the narrative at the time. So, why not run with it? I think it's, probably an important exercise to try and collect this data. And, I guess I'm glad they're continuing to publish this on a regular basis. But also at the end of the day, the data is just not true in many aspects. So what they're thinking, I'm not really sure. Are they malicious actors? I definitely don't think so. But are there problems with their data? I mean, self-evidently, yes. So, yeah.
I noticed that in the new report, they also, instead of basically having just a completely new data set, they represented it as went from 0 to this much higher number, which I thought was a strange choice.
Yeah. And that's how it got played up in the news media also. And this resurgence in hash rate in China or something like that. And in the article, I explained, a couple possibilities, possible scenarios for how that resurgence could have actually happened and why all those scenarios are just, insane. So the hash rate that's in China, as probably almost 99% of it has been there the whole time. But the data was, poorly collected and or misreported by miners to Cambridge, and then Cambridge to, the broader public, and all these sorts of things. So it's, yeah, I guess maybe that's as good of a segue as I can give to the next part, which is what are the problems with the data? I kind of maybe touched on directly or indirectly those problems a couple times, but at the end of the day, the data is just, not super reliable, and there are some important reasons for why that's the case.
Zach, I'm curious if these, and this is purely speculative, if these companies that did retain a hash rate in China, if they are more state operated or privately owned, or just individual miners who are doing one-off operations. Where would you, based on your understanding, assess the most likely owners of those mining operations in China?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's lots of speculation, that some whatever hash rate is left in China is, privileged and politically supported, or at least approved by, regulators and people in power. I don't think that's mostly the case. Sure, there are probably some CCP party officials who are mining some Bitcoin, probably, without a question, probably yes. But I think mostly the hash rate in China is small scale sort of lean operations, not necessarily mobile operations, but just stuff that doesn't consume insane amounts of power and is as a result not as easily detected. There's videos of people just out in nature by a stream, running 1 or 2 ASICs with very, very sort of bootleg rustic mining operations. That's probably not the norm, but just smaller operations in general that are less difficult, or that are more difficult, less easy to detect. But some of this hash rate probably controlled by party officials. Yeah, probably some of it. How much? I think definitely minority, but that's mostly just a guess, because I don't chat with CCP party officials actually really ever at all. Just sort of a deductive guess.
Wait.
Keep them on
You
speed
said
dial.
you said really ever at all. When do you talk to CCP party officials?
Yeah, true. I guess I should make that even more definite. That's not at all actually, unless unknowingly some of my mining colleagues are party officials, but that seems unlikely. But like I think like there's like so many governments are mining Bitcoin already right now that that China with its historic position in the Bitcoin mining industry and its proximity to all this mining hardware manufacturing, that at least like some of their party officials aren't like at least mining for a hobby or maybe research purposes or who knows what. Definitely some of that, but I think it's very very small amount of hash rate. So like bottom line is most of that hash rate in China is from smaller leaner operations that are harder to detect. But like since last May, in the past like year, I guess there are headlines that pop up occasionally. Like the Chinese officials are taking this seriously, and they're still seizing hundreds of machines and thousands of machines and different like busts, I guess you would call them, of illegal mining activity. So it's definitely not a mining friendly place, which I guess also goes back to the reliability of this data. Like China hasn't just said, okay, just kidding, the ban's reversed, you can mine here again. So like 20% of Bitcoin's hash rate just like went back to China overnight. No. So the problem is with the data, not with the actual physical location of the hash rate in real life. Yeah. And I guess now's a good time to give a shout out to two reporters who reported seriously on this over the past year. Wolfie Zhao, who I guess is actually an analyst over at The Block now. He was a reporter for a while. He wrote, several articles, at least a couple that I can think of, on the, documenting the underground mining scene in China after the ban. And Mackenzie Siglos over at CNBC, who also took these claims seriously and reported on China's underground mining scene after the ban. And I don't want to like speculate on how much of this influenced Cambridge's outcome this time, but some of this news reporting was cited in their research, which strikes me as a little bit backwards, that the researchers are citing the journalists instead of maybe journalists citing the academic researchers. But either way,
point.
Either way, I'm glad it got cited in Cambridge's latest China mining analysis, because it's great reporting by both those people. So yeah, shout out to Mackenzie and Wolfie.
Love that. Love to see and hear that there are some good reporters who are finding their journalistic integrity as they go down these rabbit holes. Um, Zach, I want to now spend some time just talking about data more broadly, and then we can get into the nuances and specifics of like what we think is flawed in this data. Like I consider myself a data nerd. I do data analysis genuinely like for fun as a hobby. And like one of the first things I was always taught is like if you put garbage in, you're gonna get garbage out. So I'm kind of curious first off, like how or why. Why isn't the right word, but like at what step in this process, whether it's the data collection from those who are collecting the data or those who are giving the data up, like who do you think is more at fault for the bad data that we're now sort of talking about right here?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And you're definitely right. Like garbage in, garbage out. Like data and research in general are only as reliable as the quality of the methodology that's used to collect and analyze them, right? I think so. A friend of mine, Ethan Vera, one of the co-founders of Luxor Mining, was pretty vocal on Twitter after so we had the 0% hash rate for sort of like incident with Cambridge data getting a lot of notoriety, and then a couple weeks ago we had like poof 20+% is back, and Ethan went on Twitter and was like, mining pools just like lied to Cambridge, which I think is a key part of this, and we can get to in a little bit. But if you ask him that question, he would definitely say sort of the mining pools that like, I think there's like 3 or 4 pools that are contributing to Cambridge's research. And he was pretty confident that they just like gave them bad data. But I think Cambridge, collected some bad data on their own too. and like they have their methodology, very detailed and published on their, what is this called? The Bitcoin Electricity Consumption Index. So on that page, they also have like their mining map and hash rate distribution charts. And at the very top, the first assumption that they list is that the IP addresses of a mining facility are an accurate representation of the actual like physical geographic location of that mining activity. And well, I guess before we get to that, the second, there's two problematic assumptions that they make with this data. The second one is, that data provided by participating mining pools constitutes a representative sample of Bitcoin's total geographic hash rate distribution, which basically just says like we rely on the data mining pools give us to tell us like how Bitcoin's hash rate is distributed. And if mining pools lie, well, they assume that lie to be a representative sample of Bitcoin's total hash rate distribution. The first, like the biggest problem in my mind is like it's trivial to relocate your hash rate or your IP address, I guess, without actually physically relocating your hash rate. Like any miner can, sort of switch proxies or VPNs that they're using to mine with. And of course, like dozens of huge mining operations in China, like actually had to unplug their machines and relocate them either just into storage, which some miners did. They're just like, I mean, I don't know the reasoning, but like, it sort of seemed to like, fuck this, like I'm not gonna relocate this internationally. I'm just gonna sit on these machines and wait for something to change. Or, they actually did like ship them overseas, which was very expensive. And actually, I guess now it's actually even gotten more expensive. But in the article I mentioned, an unlikely but very realistic or very possible scenario where a miner in Mexico, each quarter switches like the location of their VPN around the world to a different server. Cambridge would look at that data and assume that miner has physically relocated their mining farm to each of those different countries every quarter and include that in their data, which is, is just absurd. And of course, this is a hypothetical. I'm not saying Cambridge is absurd that they actually did that. But the hypothetical would lead their methodology to assume that actually happened, which is absurd. So like right out of the gate, I'm trying to think of how to best word this. Like you have, obviously every research project has assumptions, but at some point you kind of need a little bit of a reality check as to like, okay, how, like legitimate are these assumptions, like the qualifications that we're putting, the parameters we're putting on this project, like, are these like, do the assumptions actually make the final results reliable or not? And if not, then maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and find a fresh set of assumptions or a different data collection method. Because in my opinion, just from this first assumption that they list on their methodology page, the end result is, completely compromised. So yeah, I guess I don't know if we want to dive into that anymore, but that's like one of the biggest problems I see from the data. It's just, trivial to manipulate or change where your IP address says you're mining from. It's very, very expensive and difficult in most cases to actually move your physical machines and actual hash rate somewhere else. And this isn't necessarily like it's Cambridge's fault that they have this assumption and that they're using this to guide their data, but it's not their fault that this actual data is difficult to collect. Like mining data, as I note in the article also, is very difficult to collect. And I don't pay much attention to the Bitcoin Mining Council at all, but they also got criticism for a similar set of data on mining activity that they published. I think they try and publish it every quarter. I'm not really sure if they're still doing that, but they got criticism for their methodology too, because like mining data is just difficult stuff. But all of that aside, it's not like an excuse for bad data. It gives some context to why the data is bad. You have to ask yourself, like, are these assumptions worthwhile? Or do they actually, undercut from the get-go the quality of the product we're trying to produce? And I think the answer is definitely yes, at least for this first assumption. So, yeah.
What, in your just opinion, would be a solution here? Like, who needs to be held more accountable, or should this just kind of operate as it sees fit? And like, why do we need this data collected and shared with people?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? I'll admit, like, for every criticism someone lobs at, a research project or, just like an industry project in general, it's always great to have like a solution. But in this case, there aren't many great solutions for collecting this sort of data, because like, for one thing, like miners just have very little incentive to publish this data on their own. And this kind of leans back into the history of the mining and the nature of the mining industry in general. Like mining has typically been, a pretty like private industry. Talk to any journalist who has covered the Bitcoin mining industry for more than like the past 3 years, I guess. And miners just like typically don't like talking to people. Like they just do their own thing, unless they're selling like a product or service and they need like press or public coverage or something like that. They just plug in their machines, manage their hash rate, manage pool services, everything they need to keep their operations up and running. And they don't really care much about the outside world. That changed pretty significantly in the past, I guess, like 3 or 4 years, with the advent of very, very large publicly traded mining companies. And of course, publicly traded mining companies, they have shareholders to market to and regulators to interact with, just broader markets to release information and updates and all these sorts of things too. And also a little bit of a geographic shift over to the Western world, where some things are just more public culturally. But like mining has always been like very private, and the incentives just aren't there for miners to publish this data unless there's some exogenous incentive, like you're a publicly traded mining company, or you're operating maybe in North America, where the regulatory environment is a little bit more unpredictable and you want to like curry favor with regulators by self-publishing some data, those sorts of things. So there aren't many great solutions. It's kind of like just a broken endeavor. I don't think like Cambridge's index is totally useless. I think in large part their effort is valuable for showing like some of the problems with this data. But that doesn't make the data more reliable. It's just kind of tricky as it is. I guess maybe we could jump down to the second assumption they make, since we're talking about miners and their incentive to publish this data. Like, why are I'm pretty sure, I'm not seeing it right in front of me, but their text is small and I'm not reading it very carefully. I'm pretty sure they have like 4 pools contributing to this data. And obviously there are way more than 4 pools like in the Bitcoin mining industry. So why aren't more pools contributing to this? Yeah, here we go. BTC.com pool and BABDC and Foundry. Like, why aren't more pools contributing to this data? Well, I mean, they just really don't have an incentive to. Like, why would they? Cambridge could offer stronger incentives, and that could bolster the credibility of their data, maybe to some degree. But some of like one of the big problems, going back to what I mentioned, Ethan said on Twitter, is like for pretty much everything in Bitcoin, we say obviously don't trust, verify, and Cambridge has very few tools to actually apply that rule to this project of theirs. Like how they basically have to trust that miners are telling them that what miners are telling them is accurate, that where miners are saying their hash rate is actually where it is. And if miners, lie, or as I mentioned, maybe conveniently fall into a narrative and don't want to broadcast publicly that their hash rate is in what is now the most anti-mining like region in the world, they'll just say we have no hash rate there, and Cambridge will report, okay, there's no hash rate there, and then Bloomberg will pick up, there's no hash rate in China. And that's sort of the food chain for this data. So there's lots of problems with this, and the lack of ability to actually verify what the mining pools are saying is accurate, and the small sample size of what mining pools are actually contributing to this because of the lack of incentives for more miners to participate. Just like sort of a whole bunch of compounding problems here that result in a less than ideal product. So yeah. Hopefully all that made sense, I guess. I don't know how much of this is like inside speak to make sense in my head, but maybe it doesn't necessarily make sense when I say it out loud. But those 2 assumptions I think are the biggest problems with Cambridge's project in my mind: the IP address reliance and the small and lack of like just non-incentivized participation from miners. So
Well,
yeah.
I'd like to spend a little bit of time on that second assumption, because while the miners may not have necessarily an incentive to properly share the data that they have, why do why does someone like me necessarily need the data, or even why does someone who's not even involved in the Bitcoin ecosystem necessarily need that data? I'm not necessarily saying I'm for or against not sharing it. I'm just curious what your argument would be as to why that data does need to be shared and made public.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think like the easiest answer, like there's several answers. One part of it is like, people like us just love to play with this data. Like it gives us a little bit more granular perspective on the health and nature and like status quo of the Bitcoin network. And obviously, Bitcoin mining is one of the most important like infrastructural parts of the Bitcoin economy. And like it's natural to want to know more about like something you are involved in heavily and care a lot about. And at this point, is supporting like trillions of dollars in economic value every year. Hang on, just lost my train of thought. Let me get it back. Oh, there it is. This may be more helpful to understand, like by way of analogy. It like trying to pinpoint this hash, like the geographic hash rate distribution and the incentives that go along with like why miners would want to report this is similar to like trying to pinpoint the geographic distribution of Bitcoin addresses. Like where in the world were all of these addresses used and were the payments sent and received from? Like what incentive do Bitcoin hodlers have to, self-publish or to submit data to someone like Cambridge, the location where they created an address, sent it, or received Bitcoin? Like there's basically no incentive, right? But that's along the same lines. If Cambridge was to, run that study of Bitcoin address geographic distribution, that's along the same lines of this project. And some large exchanges, or maybe you could get a couple thousand Bitcoin users to submit their data. Is that a representative sample? Is that a trustworthy sample? Is it a verifiable sample? Probably definitely not. But to the point of incentives, there's basically no incentive for anyone to participate in that at any sort of significant scale. And the same is true of miners submitting their hash rate geographic information to something like Cambridge. There just isn't a strong enough incentive. And maybe for some of these miners still, they're steeped in, like, it's only been a couple of years, they're still steeped of Bitcoin mining, being much more public and like friendly with the media and outspoken on these things. Mining was, often in the shadows in many ways. And, some miners just prefer to operate there still, for sure. So yeah, very little incentive.
Do you think things like a country like China coming out and at least saying they're banning mining, or the state of New York creating more restrictions around how or what miners can do as far as energy sources go, like do these type of events have a material effect on the way miners want to operate in the public space as a result? And if so, what does that effect look like?
Yeah. I mean, I think we can, like, I think it's fair to assume like probably at least some of the mining pools, maybe not all four, but at least some of them, like, just misrepresented their data to Cambridge. Like, I guess you could just say lied. I don't really, want to be too antagonistic, but so we'll settle for misrepresented. But that's like a clear example of the incentives that, these policy changes can make for miners. Like, massive incentive to say nothing, even if you have, a non-zero amount of your hash rate still operational in China, because the narrative is China hates mining now. Hash rate is leaving China, and then like, what would the situation be like? Oh, look at these two miners over here. They're still publicly saying that they have a lot of hash rate in China. Let's focus all our attention on them and why they're still mining, and can we find out where they're mining, and do they not care? Are they like, just spitting in regulator spaces, or like, there would be hell for those miners. So like, why in the world would they say anything? I think stepping back even more, and shout out to Steve Barber from Upstream Data. He talks about this a lot. Like the future of mining, even like step back beyond mining, the future of Bitcoin from a regulatory perspective, well, and I'm not the only one who says this. I don't remember who like said this first, but like the future will probably get harder, more difficult before it gets easier. Like we love to say, like we've won, And in theory, like we have one, like we have the best money, we have the best ideas. But I'm pretty confident, the future will get harder before it gets easier. So what does that look like for miners? Well, obviously massive mining operations are crazy easy targets for these regulators who may not be as, keen to support large mining operations. Okay, so who's left? The small scale underground mining economy, I guess we can call it, which is still obviously persisting in China. And who's to say like every country in the world won't implement their own like variation of China's policy? We already saw it with tons of hash rate that migrated to Kazakhstan after the China ban. And now those miners are going through round 2 of this because although it wasn't like a blanket ban on mining by any means, there were severe restrictions and anti-mining policies and incentives that were reneged on for miners that made their life incredibly difficult. And now miners that relocated from China to Kazakhstan, in some cases, are having to relocate, find a third place to relocate to. And at some point, like the smallest scale miner just wins because they are, very difficult to find. And if they are found, very easy to relocate. We're talking like, 1 to 5, maybe 10 or 12 machines operational, maybe a little bit larger than that. But like very small scale, very easy to relocate, very easy to camouflage. And like the future of mining probably looks like more akin to an ASIC in every house instead of a 50,000 ASIC mega farm in every state of the US, for example. So yeah, that's kind of a rambly, whining answer. I hope that made sense, but that's basically what the path of least resistance for mining for hash rate to continue to grow is very, very small scale, easily camouflaged or easily transportable mining operations, not mega mining farms. Even though we have a lot of them today and they're great and very profitable, I don't think that's the future of Bitcoin mining as like a predominant source of hash rate for the network.
At the top of this year, we saw from a lot of these big public miners a lot of promises about expanding their hash rate, building out new operations, and really building out, I think, just massive mining farms. But we're now slowly starting to see some of them pull back on some of those forecasts. Core Scientific had to drop 10 total hash rate off of their projections by the end of this year. We've seen things such as supply chain issues as well as energy shortages get cited for some of these holdups. I'm curious what you are equating or putting the most weight on as to why some of these larger miners are having a harder time to get their operations up and running right now, at least.
Yeah, that's a great point. And obviously, like, 1 second. We're in what I think are the early stages of the next Bitcoin bear market, and as the price drops, mining profitability also decreases. So on the one hand, it's sort of natural for these for these projections to be revised and guidances to be altered. I will say though, there has been a ton of deployment by some of these public mining companies in North America over the past year. And a good chunk of, well, I should say, like these projects were started and deployed over the past year. These are projects that have been planned for the past couple of years that are now coming online. Some of them, delayed up to that point by some of the issues you mentioned. And a good chunk of, the surge in hash rate that we saw after the massive drop from the China ban was not entirely Chinese hash rate being relocated somewhere else coming back online, but in large part, it was brand new hash rate in North America and other places around the world, but predominantly North America coming online, which is, encouraging for many reasons. But I think like the revisions and the projections you mentioned for some of these public miners, predominantly is just a function of change in market dynamics. Like broader equity markets are slumping. Like the world is, now having to fully digest the massive amount of cash printed as a part of, the global coronavirus response efforts. And Bitcoin is, Bitcoin just hasn't grown enough in the past cycle to fully unshackle itself from those, other global market movements. And so it's also along to the ride up and down. And, right now it's down. Hash price, which is sort of a derivative metric that reflects mining profitability, is at its lowest point in like, I think maybe 2 years or something. Hash price sort of reflects mining revenue, like in dollars per terahash per second per day. And that metric is now at, like around, I don't have it actually in front of me. I was going to say like maybe 12 cents, but it might be lower than that. I feel like it's definitely lower than that. We should edit that part out. But anyway, because it's dropping and it, everything else is dropping with it, miners aren't as miners are in more survival mode than they are during, the heat of the bear market or the bull market when everything's profitable, margins are thick. Those margins are starting to become thinner now. And, actually we just saw yesterday, like 4.3% drop in mining difficulty. And obviously difficulty drops when hash rate drops. So that sort of, indicates a little bit of a clip down in hash rate. And some of that hash rate coming offline may be because in some cases, like miners are getting squeezed out. Some miners that are, operating with more expensive machines, higher electricity prices, that sort of entered later in the latest bull market. So like higher point of cost of entry for the mining operations. Some of it may be, some miners just preventatively bring a small amount of hash rate offline to limit expenses for other reasons. Hard to predict, but yeah, the bear market is definitely having an effect on these sorts of things, and I think that's by far the primary reason. As far as I know, there hasn't been any big like regulatory news for mining that would cause hash rate to drop by a couple percent, but yeah, it's definitely a bear market, and in a bear market, a miner's job, everyone's job, but particularly miners' job, is just to survive. And we all hope miners survive, because miners not only do they provide like an important function to the network, but like miners are the most bullish people in Bitcoin entity operating in the Bitcoin economy. They're the most heavily leveraged entities in the market, with all of the operational expenses and capital expenditures that they have to incur to actually start mining and continue mining. Miners are like the pinnacle of being bullish on Bitcoin. And in the bear market, their job and everyone else's job is just to survive, to be bullish again in the next bull cycle. So yeah, long answer again. Sorry about that.
No need to apologize. P, I've been hijacking this conversation, and I intend to just continue to hold Zach hostage to answer all of my silly, dumb questions here, unless you chime in.
No, this is great. I can pay you no higher compliment than I have very little to say. One thought based on what you were just saying actually is, as we enter into this bear market, this is a fantastic time for the average person to consider, buying an older miner, and basically starting to figure this out for themselves and running some experiments. I'm curious what you think, Zach, in terms of like, do you think that if somebody's interested in doing that, the time is now, or do you think that the ASIC market is going to continue to go down, and there might be a more opportune time in 3 to 6 months, 12 months?
Yeah, the time, I won't necessarily say the time is now, but the time is, probably it's probably soon, to at least like time is probably soon. You don't need to be in a rush, I guess, would be the best answer, because, we're in a bear market, and one of the good things about the ASIC, like mining hardware market in general, is that machine prices generally lag behind Bitcoin. So once Bitcoin starts to dive, you generally see like a week or two, sometimes more, lag in time between when the ASIC market starts to decline also. And there are, several reasons for that. But on the upside, like once Bitcoin, maybe finds a bottom and starts going up again at whatever point in the future that will be, ASIC prices will probably stay at, they're like whatever lower price they are at then for, at least a couple days. So you don't have to be in a rush. There's a little bit of a lag there, and you can, decide what your goals are with your mining operation. I was at an event in Nashville recently with Econo Alchemist, and we were on separate panels talking about mining, but afterwards, people came up to us and asked us for advice on mining, and I appreciated his answer. We both basically gave the same answer to everybody, which was you need to find, figure out what your goals are if you're interested in mining, because there are so many ways to do it. And like, should you mine Bitcoin? I think the answer is definitely yes, but that's also a question like, should you buy Bitcoin? I think the answer is definitely yes. Okay, like how do you buy Bitcoin? Where do you buy it? How much do you buy? Like what frequency? All those questions I don't have answers for because it depends on your goals and your situation. I will say though, I like the most common advice I give to people who are interested in mining is to spend right now. I think it's $200 to $300 to buy an old S9, an 8-miner S9, which is Kaboom Racks describes this as like the AK-47 of mining hardware, which is to say like it's indestructible, it'll last forever, always be able to use it. Kaboom Racks, by the way, is one of the best marketplaces for hardware, new and used. And assuming like a couple $100 won't break your budget if you are interested in mining, which if like you'll spend a lot more than $200 if you're serious about mining. So if that expense is a little bit prohibitive, then maybe this is not for you. But buy an old S9, plug it in, let it run for a little bit, figure out how to connect it to a pool, maybe install some custom firmware on it if you want to get really sophisticated, and then maybe unplug it and take it apart and see what's inside of it and figure out a little bit more hands-on of how the machine actually works. And as a result of that, you might break it and might not be able to put it back together, but you'll learn a ton. So that's like the best advice I think I can give to someone interested in starting to mine. And through that process, you'll learn, okay, do I actually want to like buy more of these machines? Do I want to run them myself? And if yes to the first, what type of machine do I want to buy? How big's my budget? And if no to the second, then what are some third-party hosted solutions that I could buy machines from and they'll run them with probably a little bit higher electricity costs and no direct access from you. But like I said at the beginning of this answer, there's so many ways you can approach the question of like, how do I mine Bitcoin? Now it's not always been that way, but thankfully now there are so many options. I think the first and best way to get started is just buy an old reliable model like an S9, plug it in, run it a bit, take it apart, and then you'll have a lot more knowledge to better answer the question for yourself of, do I want to keep doing this? So yeah, hope that helps.
What do you think when do you think we will be in a world where ASICs are being mass produced from foundries at a level that makes it possible to create lower cost ASICs that are just ubiquitous and people can actually start using them in, their forced air heating systems? And when I say actually, you can do that today, 100%. I just mean when it is economically feasible for the average person to seriously consider doing that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's some tension in like how to answer that question because it kind of depends on like what future you see for like the Bitcoin mining industry. Like, do you see it as like a heavily commercialized global high profile industry, or do you see it kind of always being something that's more heavily reliant on an underground culture with some like very high profile commercial entities being involved in the industry, but more like punk rock underground than heavily commercialized, widely marketed, available mining industry. And I tend to lean more towards the second one of those two options, the more underground. But there are already some cool, in-home mining products you can use. Like I don't use them personally, so this isn't necessarily an endorsement, but it looks cool, at least on their website. Heatbit offers like a space heater that's supposedly very quiet. You only have like 14 terahash as opposed to like even S9, which is, oh, actually this is embarrassing. I don't even remember the hash rate of an S9, but it's a lot more than that. Let me just Google this really quick. I want to say it's like 60. Wait,
Who
no,
will win? I'm Googling it at the same time.
and miner is 14 terahash. Wait, so what am I looking at? Okay, let's see what the Heatbit That's what I was thinking. I was just comparing this to somebody before, so I had it mixed up in my head. EPIT offers, oh, also, they're not sponsoring me. I've given them way more airtime than I probably should. I can't find it on their website, but it's, a lot quieter. They say it's a noise like a quiet library.
I feel like if one really cares
So
about Bitcoin, you're willing to go deaf to support the network.
yeah. True. That's a valid point. But and then there's also people in Europe like Wise Mining who are building much more sophisticated stuff that's not even widely usable yet. For like water heating, to basically use hashboards to heat your whole like water system, I guess, in your house.
Yeah. And Coin Heated is doing stuff with
Yeah,
that.
Coinbase is doing cool stuff too.
Right now,
They're
yeah.
trying to, make whiskey with mining heat also, which
Oh
I hope
man,
tastes good. But yeah, I
that's
don't.
amazing.
So yeah, they're cool guys. But to your question, I don't know what the future looks like. I think mining will be pushed more underground and more sort of small scale, longer term, instead of always having these massive public mining companies all over the world, especially in the U.S. markets. So yeah, not sure.
What keeps you up at night when you're when with just in general? Also, what's your worst childhood memory? Now, as it relates to mining, what is the thing? What's something that keeps you up at night?
Hmm. That's a good question. I like that question. I also the tricky one, I guess. Like mining sort of like Bitcoin is always, going to be okay. So I guess on the one hand, there shouldn't really be much that keeps you up at night. Like it's everything's gonna be fine. But will there be, more instances in the future of like large changes in the dynamic of the industry, like with the China mining ban? Like probably, almost inevitably.
Yeah, I think
Because
definitely.
yeah, because Bitcoin is still like young and growing, and so is mining along with it. And mining, out of probably every other sector in the Bitcoin economy, is probably the most like lagging. And I don't want to say like immature, like underdeveloped, like least professionalized, maybe is a way to characterize it.
Ooh, can you
Miners just
elaborate?
kind of
What do you mean by least professionalized?
miners just kind of do their own thing, and there's like exchanges and sort of like what you would probably think of as more typical like Bitcoin software companies and all these sorts of things, have much better like comms and marketing strategies, and government relations teams. They spend millions and tens of millions of dollars on compliance and all these sorts of stuff, like these sort of normie budget allocations, I guess. Miners just kind of like I see the normification of mining, I guess, in a huge way coming through like their partnerships with energy companies. But for a while, mining has just kind of been like rogue counterparties accumulating lots of hardware and neckbeards building mining farms and toying around with different firmware. But now it's sort of being pushed into the mainstream of Bitcoin's narrative, in ways that hasn't been before. So I think it's definitely like growing up a bit. But other sectors in the Bitcoin economy did that before mining. I don't know. I'm sure miners probably disagree with me on that, but that's just sort of personal opinion that I hold and seems to ring true in most cases. But nothing really keeps me up at night too much. I think there are lots of reasons for like large public miners to be kept up at night, because in some ways they have the easiest job in mining. They just raise money, buy machines, and try to plug them in. They also have the hardest because they're the most public and high profile operators in the industry. They have lots of responsibilities and regulatory obligations and all that stuff, nobody really likes. So if I was a large public miner, I'd probably be up at night about more things than I am now, which right now it's pretty much zero. I talk to and work with and interact with home miners, smaller scale miners, the most, and they're great. Like life is great for them. Some of them, um, maybe a little bit worried about like fair market conditions and operating costs and that sort of stuff, but they're all operating small to mid-sized farms, focusing on optimizing their operations and from every angle, and planning for expansion through the bear market if they can afford it. Life is still good for them. So yeah, nothing really keeps me up at night, I guess.
And what's your worst childhood memory?
Oh boy,
Joke.
worst childhood memory? I don't know.
That's a
I've
very
saved that for
personal
another live
question,
stream, probably.
but I do expect you to answer it. No, I got it. Makes sense. Q, what you
Zach,
got?
we've got about a little less than 30 minutes left. And if you'll entertain me, you brought up something at the very beginning of this conversation that actually was a topic of conversation that we had on this show maybe yesterday or the day before, of the idea of is it harmful to Bitcoin should a nation state have within its borders or within its boundaries a majority of the hash rate? And I present that question to you and will allow you to ramble as you see fit, but genuinely curious what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and obviously something that not just miners, but everyone that watches Bitcoin thinks about, and has talked about a lot, because everyone watched for years China or not necessarily control, but just sort of represent, um, you know, uh, almost a majority of Bitcoin's hash rate. I don't like. I feel like I've said this a couple different places. I couldn't tell you exactly where though. Oh, I know. I said it in a panel at least one place, a panel at Tone Vays' conference in Vegas. I don't think we'll ever see a country sort of take China's spot with, 50 or more percent of Bitcoin's hash rate. I think that era of one country controlling the majority of hash rate is over for sure. Just because China kind of opened the floodgates and gave up a huge share of the market, and around the same time we were in the heat of the bull market. I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if China made that ban during like a bear market where profitability was low, some miners getting squeezed out of the market. Maybe nobody cared about mining or cared about Bitcoin. Like what would have happened? Things probably would have played out similarly, but I doubt if we would have gotten that much media attention and all sorts of other types of attention, political attention from people in the US. Anyway, that's beside the point. I think we'll never see that again, but I don't think it's dangerous for like a country. I definitely think it's not advantageous to the network though, which is why I think, miners around the world understand the incentives of the industry they operate in, and they're working to find cheap energy wherever they can. And there's still, lots of hardware in the market waiting to be plugged in and trying to find a spot to be plugged in. I guess like you could, again, it's kind of ironic saying this in a conversation about mining data being notoriously hard to collect, but my guess is that there's probably like 20% of all mining hardware that has been purchased and shipped is just like sitting offline waiting to be plugged in, or trying for with their owners trying to find a place to plug them in. And we see in filings some large public mining companies sitting on lots of mining hardware that they just can't plug in yet. So there's still like an appetite to plug this stuff in. You mentioned some, revisions and guidance and expansion plans from some of the public miners, and that's definitely the case. But there's still lots of hardware out there. Miners are still actively looking for the cheapest energy they can find, and that won't really, change ever. Hash rate will always continue to go up and to the right, with some, occasional dips along the way. But I don't see it as harmful to the country, to the government itself. But yeah, it's definitely harmful to the network. And I'm glad. I think pretty much everyone is glad that that era of China having that much hash rate is over. And I don't think we'll ever really see that again happen somewhere else.
I'm curious though, like in the same way that New York can change its mind and pass new legislation, or China can go out and reverse a decision, is it not something that the Bitcoin network at large at least needs to be conscious of when you have a country like China have almost 60% of the hash rate, or the US starting to like really creep up and have like this majority hash rate? Like what happens if I don't know, Congress just decides to start pushing forward very aggressive anti-mining legislation, or says something to the tune of, in the same way that they took everyone's gold, and it was a necessity for the future of the country. It's a necessity for every Bitcoin miner to be turned over to the hands of the government. And now the US government or some other foreign nation is in charge of or in control of a significant portion of hash rate. Like, is that not, like, am I just being hyperbolic here? Am I
I
being too
think
dramatic?
I think you're being hyperbolic. I think that we have seen that happen in the past multiple times, right? The number of times China, I remember so vividly when China first tried to ban Bitcoin and the market like was like, oh shit, dog, and just like started tanking, right? And then the second time it happened, people were like, I mean, it was fine last time. And the third time it was like, the fourth time it was like, I mean, what? This doesn't even matter. The fifth time, you know what I mean? It just, it wasn't actually. Now, more recently, they banned mining, which was unique, to be fair. But countries have been trying to ban Bitcoin almost since its inception, and it never quite works out. And I think that the question is a valid one, but I think if anything was going to have this catastrophic effect, it would have been the recent, China ban. And when mining starts to become centralized in any political region, that is to say a country or a geographical region, and that's significant because, if enough miners are in a single place, then that creates risk to the network in terms of like a tsunami or a giant earthquake that kills all the power and stuff like that. It does create some element of risk. And right now, the majority of hash rate, as I understand it, is in the United States. But the incentives tend to drive miners to multiple places in the world. And so, if as soon as there is cheaper power or more favorable legislation in another part of the country or in another part of the world, miners will migrate to that area, or rather miners that are in that area will start to succeed more and amass more ASICs and things like that. So I think it all goes back to the incentives. And I think that, it would be a huge blow if the United States decided to suddenly, ban mining. But I think the chance of that actually happening is just astronomically small. I think it's like asking, what would happen if a meteor slammed into Washington, D.C. and just erased it off the face of the earth? It's like, I guess that is statistically possible, but it is very, very, very improbable. And that has to do with, again, those incentives, right? I think that it's something that we need to be aware of, but I don't think it's something that we need to specifically lose sleep over. Unless we saw like 80% of the network moves to Georgia or something like that, then I'd be like, oh shit, we got a problem. But I just don't think it's ever going to happen. Zach, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there are, definitely some countries that have a much lower percentage chance of, taking some sort of negative regulatory stance against mining than others. But I would also sort of, never rule it out anywhere because politicians are fickle and regulators can be unpredictable. So like, I agree with you on the point of like, will the US sort of ever, imitate the China ban we saw a year ago? Probably not, like very, very low percentage chance, but I wouldn't put it at zero either. And like you said, the incentives for miners to relocate, pretty much anywhere else will always be there as long as the Bitcoin network is there and, miners can operate profitably. And when one country kicks them out, like other countries will, almost inevitably welcome them in. So like, as, we see hash rate continue to go up and to the right, will there be, like occasional dips, maybe for regulatory reasons because of something else like China? Sure. Yeah, probably. Like, is the US at the top of the list of candidates for people to cause a dip like that? I think pretty obviously not. But I also think like between North America or in North America, between Canada and the US, we'll probably never see like more than 40% of hash rate in this region and, probably less than 30 to 40% in either one of those countries on their own. But if we start getting up to those numbers or past them, I think that, would be concern for, or cause for concern. because that's a lot of hash rate. We're getting right back. That would be a signal that we're sort of getting back to the centralization of what we saw or what we experienced for years with China. But everything's getting more distributed, not just hash rate. Hardware manufacturing and ASIC production is also getting more distributed. So the chances of another, it's not really catastrophic. The network's fine for a bit. It was kind of chaotic, but we'll just say chaotic or catastrophic. Another catastrophic event like China's ban. The probability of that happening again, probably relatively low, but also not zero. It could happen again, and miners will go offline, try and relocate when they can, and network will be fine. So blocks come every 10 minutes, regardless of how much hash rate there is. Well, actually, that's not necessarily true because difficulty will have to adjust. But assuming adjusted difficulty, blocks come every 10 minutes, almost regardless of any other exogenous factors. So the network will be fine, regardless of what happens. And we love to see hash rate go up. It means the network's more secure, more computing power being paid for to secure the network and process transactions and mint new Bitcoins. But even if hash rate drops, everything will still be okay. So, yeah.
Q, in short, you're being a worrywart. Don't trip, dog.
Hey, but it's good to worry about. Some people don't worry about it enough, which is why Austin Storms over at Galaxy Mining talks about this a lot. People, for a bit, just basically some miners treated, mining in North America and mining in Kazakhstan as, basically of equal regulatory risk. Because, historically, for a bit, Kazakhstan was very pro miner and very friendly. They created tax incentives. They basically gave miners free reign. And then they started having problems with some of their energy markets, and how much of that was caused by miners is a little bit of an open question. But then they started pulling some of these incentives, cracking down and capping on how much new mining activity.
A little bit or a lot of it?
A little bit. Miners definitely were using a lot of energy, but also they weren't the only consumers of energy in Kazakhstan, so they were just sort of an easy scapegoat in some cases. And so Kazakhstan started limiting, how much new hash rate, how many new mining farms could be built in their borders. And miners, very quickly realized that there is real geopolitical risks operating in one jurisdiction versus another. And right now in North America, especially the US, miners don't have the same level of risk as miners operating in Kazakhstan. And for a while, some miners just didn't really add that risk into their calculations for where to operate. So definitely not out of place to worry, but I definitely think there is a ranking for how much worry each location, each country deserves. And the U.S. right now at least isn't at the top of that list, but who knows? The U.S. and pretty much every other country is undergoing massive political changes left and right. So basically the reason why I never write off any country to replicate something like China did for miners last May is because the future of politics is extremely unpredictable. So anything could happen, really.
All right. I got a random question for you. And this is an important one.
Okay.
What animal do you think best exemplifies the Bitcoin network?
That's a good question. I'll be honest, I think the honey badger is a pretty good one, but the guys over at Cathedra, also another public mining companies, we like public mining companies, but they aren't our favorite type of miner. They said their goal is to be the cockroaches of Bitcoin mining, which is, small. They are off-grid mining, so I guess the small makes sense. Basically, indestructible and eternally enduring. You can never really kill a cockroach, except if a meteor strikes or nuclear war, I guess. Although, are they supposed to survive nuclear war too? I don't really know.
Yeah, I was about to say that's the whole stupid thing about cockroaches. You can't nuke them.
There you go. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
whether or not Bitcoin miners can survive a nuclear holocaust, I think that's probably a little bit more questionable, but it's a good aspiration. So I'll go with cockroach probably. I think that's as far as I know, they were the first ones to sort of come up with that branding for mining cockroaches. But Yeah, good analogy for sure.
I would have to say mine is the naked mole rat. They're super strange. They're mammals,
Mhm.
but most rodents, which is what a naked mole rat is, they only live for like 2 to 5 years, depending on the rodent. There's some that live longer. Naked mole rats live for 30 years. They also are completely
Wow.
immune to cancer, and uh, they are completely insensitive to pain. They have no pain receptors, no nociceptors. I feel like also
Hmm.
they look like weird as shit.
Yeah, I just
Um,
Googled an image of one. I
it
haven't
looks like
seen
a
these before.
yeah, it looks like a testicle with teeth, basically.
It does.
Um,
This is sort of what I imagine reply guys on Twitter saying mean things look like. It probably look like this.
I mean, you're not
Yeah.
wrong. You're not wrong. Um, yeah, they're super weird. They're also the only known like hive organism in mammals, which I feel like is also a good analogy for the Bitcoin network.
Hmm.
Yeah, they basically live forever. They can't die with cancer. Not forever, 30 years. They feel no pain, and they are part of this larger network. And without that network, they cease to exist.
I'll, I agree with all those reasons. I think the cockroach is good just for basically one reason. They're like hard to destroy, but there's lots of reasons why naked mole rat seems like a good animal. But one thing that it doesn't have is it doesn't look as cool as a honey badger. So the visuals there are a little bit lacking. Although it does
That's
look pretty like demonic and evil. Like I wouldn't want to mess around with one of these things. It just looks freaky. But yeah, I like all those reasons. We should have a public poll and have people pick a
Let
new
me show you my
mascot.
naked mole rat tattoo. No, I'm kidding. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
No,
change.
that's cool.
I'm gonna change my
Thanks.
background. I mean, cool. This was not that interesting of a question, but it occurred to me, and I wanted to know your opinion. So I
No,
appreciate
I
it.
Thank
like, I
you
mean, I
so
actually don't
much,
even
P.
know. There's probably like some lore to how we got, maybe this is embarrassing that I don't know, but I don't know like where the honey badger came from. Is it just like, I don't know, did it come from Bitcoin Talk forum somewhere back in the day? I don't know. But maybe we need a new animal mascot.
My background
Uh,
is now a naked mole rat. You're welcome,
yeah,
Emil.
see, like I would never mess with that thing. Never mess with Bitcoin either, I guess.
Shout out Kim Possible for that naked mole rat that was on Kim. Like, that's the only reason I know what a naked mole rat is. The extent and detail in which I just learned about this. I hate you so much, P.
You love it. All right,
No, I
what's
don't.
next?
Although I do at this point need, because like Chris is throwing some like wildly outlandish claims in a private chat that I'm just gonna like dox you because I don't believe this. But he claims that the best way to kill a cockroach is with a vacuum. But like
Really?
I don't know why, but for whatever reason in my head, I'm genuinely convinced that even if I vacuum a cockroach up, it's like still alive in there.
For sure. The problem with that too is that you only suck up one cockroach. Like
Hmm.
or the rest of them. Cockroaches. Again, they're like this. Like they're not actually a hive organism, but there's a lot of them.
Dude, no, like I have such a disgusting story that I'm gonna share it with you. It's gonna give me a nightmare tonight. Like I'm gonna look like shit tomorrow. But when I studied abroad in Australia, like me and my buddies were just living in a house off campus, and I'm in the kitchen. I scream like a little bitch. Oh my god, there's a cockroach. There's two. Oh my god, there's three. So like I'm like hiding behind the counter. My two roommates like go into the kitchen with like a broom. They try to get it. They kill one. I think they kill two, and then another one like crawls back into the cupboard. Mind you, like these are like big cockroaches. We're in Australia, so like it's already big to begin with. I go back to cooking in the kitchen. Not even 5 minutes later, and a cockroach that I swear on my fucking life is larger than my fist crawls out from under the cupboard, and I scream, ran to my room, locked the door. I was like, I don't care. The cockroach wins. I do not like they get the kitchen. I'm not stepping foot in our kitchen for the rest of the semester. So I don't care if you don't think they're hive creatures. That was a fucking mom pissed that we killed the kids, and I'm like fully convinced it was gonna kill us. A cockroach was gonna kill me. An
Well, no,
Australian cockroach.
yeah, everything's more demonic down in Australia. I know some of the spiders you guys have down there too. That's insane. No shade to Chris, but I Googled best way to kill a cockroach, and Family Handyman 13 best ways to kill cockroaches doesn't include a vacuum. So, but also this entire list just looks like shilling cockroach products. So maybe somebody paid and no vacuum companies were interested in paying for a spot in this article.
Look, Chris is, I figured it out. Chris is part of Big Cockroach, and he's trying to give us the solutions which actually don't solve the problem, in fact, make it worse. So
disinformation. Yeah, cockroach disinformation.
Yeah.
Well, now that I'm getting slandered, I got to come on here and clarify. I had an engineering professor, and don't trust but verify. He's like, the best way to get them is you like quite literally vacuum them up with a vacuum. Q thought like you were bashing them with the vacuum. I mean, I guess that would work, but like vacuum them up to catch them as they don't slip away in the cupboards. And then he was like, you actually use like a tank under vacuum conditions, and they can't survive without oxygen. So he's like, yeah, you guys are engineers. You just throw them in a tank, put them into, vacuum conditions, and they suffocate. It's like pretty gruesome way, but it gets rid of them for sure.
Oh, well, there's some science behind that then. I don't question your professor. I was definitely skeptical on sucking up a cockroach in a vacuum to kill it, but I didn't want to. I had to Google it just to be sure. I didn't.
No, he was the double vacuum technique. You vacuum up to catch them, then you put that bag in a tank and then put it under vacuum conditions, and they suffocate in like 30 minutes. Like do it for whatever. He said 30 minutes to be sure, so that way Q doesn't have to freak out when they reanimate.
This is the most impractical way to kill cockroaches I've ever heard in my life. Again, naked mole rats are the solution to this problem. An ASIC on the back of every naked mole rat, you're good to go.
There you go.
Zach, I want to ask you one thing that I wonder about is like, what is the next kind of evolution or the direction from a technical and engineering perspective that, we're going to see in terms of ASICs? One thing that I've heard is, ASICs that are specialized to perform best or optimized for specific environmental conditions. So having ASIC miners that, are optimized for and tweaked for desert environments versus, cold weather environments, things like that. What do you think about that? Is that something that's viable or even interesting?
Yeah, you could see some types of hardware like that. Even a little bit more broadly, you could see like a general category of maybe like these boutique types of ASICs that sort of have additional design considerations for some of those climates you mentioned, or variations in climate wherever they're running, or just general like enclosure environments in general, like a home environment or a large data center environment, or maybe I don't know, some sort of other industrial environment. I think like at least for the next several years, maybe measured in halvings, next several halvings, like the hardware we have now is going to be the best that is on the market. And I think even like the new entrants, like you have to consider the fact that the current ASIC manufacturers right now have years and years of R&D and tech that they've already, tested and worked through to get to the ASICs we have today on the market. And it's cool to see a bunch of new ASIC companies coming into the market with other ideas for different mining hardware products. But they're still going to have a steep learning curve ahead of them with like refining those products and making them viable. And like nothing's worse than buying a batch of brand new ASICs with, like a 50% failure rate. You're going to have a lot to prove, even more to prove then to miners if you, get off on the wrong foot. Like some of the designs may just not be great in general. Like, you've seen one of the market's leading manufacturers, Bitmain, with their sort of native immersion mining unit. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it has like the hoses on the side, plastic hoses and all these sorts of things. Like I would personally never run that machine. And there are like, a handful of environments that would just be horrible for that machine. Because plastic hates nothing more than cold and hot. So kind of can only run those machines, which are very expensive, by the way, and brand new. So who knows what their failure rate is in like, the perfect climate. So like you're probably better off just buying their other machines or buying some WhatsMiners and running them under, normal operating conditions on a clean rack with good ventilation or an immersion tank. With dielectric fluid, it kind of depends on your preference, but people are definitely going to get more experimental with the hardware, like how expensive they're going to be, how reliable they're going to be. Like like how good they're going to be is still, very much an open question. And I'm not, super impressed with the newest ASIC, the immersion unit, whatever it's called from Bitmain. But maybe some people out there love it. Most miners I've talked to aren't like crazy about it. It's a cool idea, and they're clearly trying to capture some of the trendiness of immersion cooling in mining right now, which is definitely a strong trend. But I'm not sure that hardware is that particular model is the best piece of hardware on the market. So can't recommend it. But I've never run it, so maybe it's amazing. I don't know. It's brand new.
Zack, I want to, before we wrap things up today, give you the opportunity to maybe touch on or share anything that we just didn't ask you or that you wanted to highlight.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think like I'll shill brains, I guess, a little bit. They're not really shill brains, just a Telegram chat. If you are a miner and you have any questions about like mining monitoring tools or custom firmware, which I guess is one of the products we're most popular for, any other general mining questions, like the brains mining Telegram is pretty active, and like most of the team is in there chatting with miners. An even bigger mining group though, which has nothing to do with brains, which I love to shill any chance I get, is the Home Mining Wizards group that was started by some of the guys at Upstream Data, and I think maybe one other company was involved, not really sure, but it was definitely Steve Barber's brainchild. And there's like thousands of the small scale, sort of flexible cockroach type miners we've talked about multiple times in this conversation in that group, sharing tips and tricks with each other for like managing electricity, and relationship with your utility provider, to like constructing do-it-yourself immersion builds, to just like general performance optimization techniques for sort of any smaller scale at-home mining operation. Great, like I'm assuming most of the audience for this conversation probably isn't like deep in the weeds of mining, but if anything we've talked about has piqued your curiosity, that group is definitely like a good spot to go for starters, to see some of the stuff smaller scale hobbyist miners talk about and how they work through some of the issues you'll probably encounter if you start mining, all that sort of stuff. So Home Mining Wizards on Telegram, it's a public group, anybody can join. Yeah, that's about it. Thanks for having me on, guys. Super fun conversation.
No, this was great, Zack. Thank you so much for joining us. We know that you've got plenty of articles coming up, and you'll surely be joining us again. Where can our audience stay up to date with your latest articles that you have coming out?
For sure, yeah. So I tweet out most of them from just my personal Twitter account, and they're all also archived. I have an author page on Bitcoin Magazine website. So either of those two places are good. If you just want the articles, probably just go to the Bitcoin Magazine website, because my Twitter is also heavily diluted with ramblings and shit posting and that sort of stuff. So yeah, those are pretty much the places.
Diluted, I would define it as enhanced for additional flavor.
Sure, definitely a lot of additional flavor, that's for sure.
Zack, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Guys, we're going to cut to a quick commercial break, and then we'll have news and notes with me, P, and Chris. And in the meantime, use promo code FOMO to get 10% off of everything in the Bitcoin Magazine store. Stick around, and we'll be back shortly. What is up, guys? We are back, and it is time for some news and notes. Uh, I'm going to kick it off with a very interesting, just random tidbit, but it looks like Bank of America was sending out a quick little survey to some users. I didn't get it, or maybe I should just probably open my Bank of America account. Anyways, they were asking users if they want to actually earn cryptocurrency rewards. Um, you know, on paper, it may seem like nothing. Have they rolled anything out? Have they done anything? No. But I think it's very telling from one of the largest financial institutions in this country that they are flipping their tune. Like, I have on good authority from Morgan Stanley, which is an affiliate of Bank of America, that like their employees aren't even allowed to own Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. Like, they're not allowed to go down that rabbit hole with clients should a client even ask or express interest in investing in these type of vehicles. So while this may seem like a nothing step in comparison to companies like Fidelity or JB Diamond and JB Morgan coming out and saying that Bitcoin is a viable alternative asset, um, it is a big step in the right direction for a company that has otherwise been facing the wrong way on this issue. Um, I don't know if either of you have any further thoughts on this or broadly about the American banks trying to slowly adopt Bitcoin and to a degree crypto at large.
Yeah, I mean, I think my comment would be get on board, fuckers. Like, they should already be there. Fidelity, Abigail Johnson, like, has been ahead of the curve at every step of the way. And I feel like people are, they're just starting to kind of kicking and screaming and be dragged into the Bitcoin space. I think it's neat, and I think we're going to see more and more and more of it. But those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I have a buddy that works on Wall Street. He works for one of the big banks. And, I know with all of the like financial regulations and rules, like he's under watch and key, specifically like for even investing. Like he has vesting periods when it's like once a quarter for like a week or two, that if they're not buying just an index or a mutual fund of like the broad market, like they're not allowed to be buying things because it's technically on insider trading information. And it's like, he's like, Chris, you can like list any company. And if like they're not a direct client with us, which obviously we're not allowed to trade outside of these windows, it's like, oh, we know someone who knows something about these things, so we're not allowed to trade. So like their 401ks, or even like if he has a Robinhood account, if he has a Webull account, if he has like any type of account that deals with money, they have to report it. And if you do, you can like lose your license, you can get sued. So like the compliance departments for the banks, for better or worse, are very strict with that. Obviously, that's why they don't like Bitcoin and they want to put it under their purview and they want to try and control it because they feel like they're at a disadvantage. So Jamie Dimon doesn't want Bitcoin getting a one up on him, but with all these regulations and things, it can be used as a weapon. I mean, we're seeing it with the Russia and Ukraine thing. We're seeing it with the Canada and the truckers. So yeah, it's very interesting that they're promoting if you want to get cryptocurrency back. And I know my buddy, he works on a not technically like an investing desk. He does more on debt offerings and like bond offerings and stuff. So it's a little bit different. But yeah, like it's very interesting.
Next.
Do we want to do the Davos IMF stuff?
Yeah, let's talk about that shit.
Okay, so
Hit us with it.
the long and short of it is the head of the IMF stated that at the World Economic Forum in Davos that despite the recent failure, Jesus, I can't talk today, of stable coins, that there's still market viability. And it's interesting reading this quote. I want to read one specific line of it. It gives us all speedier service, far cheaper costs, and greater inclusiveness, but only if we separate apples from oranges and bananas, the IMF boss noted. Adding, I'll read this part, adding that it was the role of regulators around the world to erect barriers and provide investor education. Now, I don't want to start on the second part. I want to start on the first part. There are two interviews. If you've never watched before, you should go back and watch them right now. First is Jack Mahler's interview on the What Bitcoin Did podcast, his most recent one, where he talks about his meeting with the IMF, and he explains using an analogy of apples, bananas, and oranges why Bitcoin matters. And he shares with Peter McCormick, and he comes onto our show and shared with us as well, that the IMF was actually far more receptive to what he was explaining about Bitcoin and the Lightning Network. And this statement, this one sentence that I read off, that is Jack Mahler's education. That is the time that Jack Mahler's took to go and sit down with the IMF coming out in Davos. And I don't think people are really realizing that.
Wait. I think that the expression comparing apples and oranges is like one of the most common expressions in the world.
Totally. But in his presentation, he used that analogy. He used apples, oranges, and bananas.
Yeah, but they only said apples and oranges, my man.
No, they said bananas.
Oh shit, they mentioned bananas too?
That's what I'm saying. Like, if it was just apples and oranges, I'd be like, all right, whatever. Like,
look, I had my knife ready. I was about to like start waving it around. No, you're totally. I mean, that's interesting because nobody says apples, oranges, and bananas.
I'm making bold claims, like I am. I 100% am. But I'm also like connecting the dots here.
You're cooking meth. I get it.
I might be cooking meth. Who knows? Don't tell my parents.
If you had said, if it had only been apples and oranges, I would have been like, bro, come on, everybody says that. But I have never heard anyone say apples, oranges, and bananas. So if they said apples, oranges, and bananas in this thing, that is very interesting to me.
So I think it's worthy. Like it is telling at least that the head of the IMF in this meeting in Davos is using those types of analogies, because then it feeds into sort of that second statement and broader, what you hear out of the Bitcoin ecosystem right now in this bear market. And it's the importance of education. And you even have the IMF chief say that we need to educate the people on what the differences are. And it's fascinating because that's what we're talking about too within the Bitcoin ecosystem. And it's going to be very interesting to see sort of how some of these countries respond, both from, hearing this conversation out of the IMF, and then also for the other countries that we're visiting down in El Salvador last week. It will be very interesting, I think, what nation states start to decide and roll out, whether it's just full blown, let's start figuring out ways to adopt or be Bitcoin / crypto friendly, or it turns into let's start really prioritizing education. And I think this now starts to maybe bring something like Joe Biden's executive order back in full circle. And now you start to see like, hey, if the conversation from a regulator level is they want to take the time to be educated, and this is the narrative that we are pushing forward, maybe it's on our community to extend that olive branch to some of these regulators, like we've seen with the Jimmy Songs, shout out Pete Rizzo and Lamar and countless others who wrote, CJ Wilson and all of them who wrote the book that made its ways into the hands of many politicians and their sort of teams, if you will, down in DC, doing more projects like that, or just setting up opportunities for these people, these lawmakers, to learn from us. Like, we were kind of joking to a degree at the conference that you had the DOJ, you had the IRS, you had all these government agencies represented as attendees of the conference. So I think we're reaching that point where you may start to see more and more people outside of Bitcoin start to ask for or seek out education, and it will be on us in our community to help guide them in the right way so that they don't go into shitcoinery.
Very interesting. Yep. What else we got? Chris, what do you think?
I got nothing else to add there. Where do you guys want to go next, Q?
Hit us with it. You're muted, my friend.
Why don't you tee up block for us, Chris?
Yeah, so Block, obviously Jack Dorsey's company, they sent out a survey, and they said the main reason people do not purchase Bitcoin is a lack of knowledge about it. So I don't know if we want to riff off that. Q, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there are like the context of that quote is a little weird because I don't think there are too many people, at least in America and most of the internet connected world, that doesn't know Bitcoin. They may not now understand it. Like I literally had one of my dad's childhood best friends was here yesterday, and we were kind of talking a little bit. He's like, I don't believe in Bitcoin. I'm like, cool. Doesn't care. Like it still operates. It's still worth more than literally anything you're going to tell me is better than uh, Bitcoin. So I think that again starts to go back to this idea of like people just are misinformed, miseducated, and just like don't really understand the value proposition of what's being presented to them.
Wait. Well, no. I agree with this, with what you just said, the statement. I think people don't understand what Bitcoin is, but it sounded like initially you were saying like, well, I don't know. I feel like most people do know what Bitcoin is.
They know from the context of like no one's going to be like, oh, I've never heard of Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, of course. I
You
don't
know what I
think
mean?
this.
Like that's more the context that I like. That's why I think that that quote is a little disingenuous because it almost implies that like people don't know Bitcoin. It's like no, they know about Bitcoin. They just don't know what Bitcoin really is.
So I haven't read this report, but I have to imagine that's not the claim they're making. I think they're making the claim. I'm assuming that basically the report is saying people aren't buying Bitcoin because they don't understand what sound money is. They don't understand how important Bitcoin is or the opportunity that it offers to, escape the, central bank bullshit that we're all stuck in. I'm assuming they're not saying like people aren't buying Bitcoin because they've never heard of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think we have a tendency to go very cosmic, Bitcoin, what it's going to do, how it's going to, end the Fed, disrupt governments and all of that. And I think for, with only 1.5%, 2% adoption, whatever number you want to use, 2.5% adoption globally, I think we need to go back to basics more often because when you have 98% of the population not in Bitcoin, you need to be like, it's, digital money, it's peer to peer. This is kind of how it works. I know I saw a thread recently about this guy that was complaining about sending money to people. Like he was frustrated. He had clearly been in Bitcoin for a couple of years now. And I'll give you context to that. He had sent, I think at the time, $50 worth of Bitcoin to his nephew. And this is going back years ago. And his nephew was young. And this is now like 6 or 7 years later. And he said, yeah, my nephew, I sent him $50 at the time. It's now worth over $5,000. And they have no idea where the private key is for the Bitcoin that I sent him. So he's like, I'm done. Like, basically he was saying like, I'm done being nice. I'm done sending free sats to people. Like, I'll help you out, but I'm not giving you anything free. And he was just kind of saying, sending sats to people, you send them 5,000 sats or however many sats that you send them, a small amount, $5 at the time, and people to their wallet so they can understand how it works. You're muted there.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with that. I think we've all had the experience of, over the years sending Bitcoin to people and then they either immediately sell it and later they're like, oh, hey, can you send me some more Bitcoin? Because I sold it immediately and now it's worth a lot more. And you're like, go fuck yourself. Or they lose it. And I mean, that's okay. I think that's, as I said earlier, like pain, and I think you said as well, like pain is an excellent teacher. And I'm lucky enough. I'm pretty OCD about that type of thing. I have never lost a private key, but I certainly have lost a lot of sats over the years doing like crazy shit, and more most recently, just opening and closing lightning channels, and I think that's okay. So I also no longer just like send people Bitcoin. I really like open dimes for this purpose because you can give someone a physical thing and say like, hey, just put this in your safe. And then if you want me to tell, you give them links. There's a lot of really great tutorials out there. Now people still lose that, but they're less likely in my experience to lose a physical object that you're like, this will be worth millions than just like a private key, which they will lose. I mean, fucking Peter McCormick lost, he's famous for losing all sorts of crazy shit, but Yeah. Anyway, one thing I just wanted to give a little bit more color to this that we were, talking about a second ago. So just looking online, they surveyed 9,500 people across 14 different countries, and they said that knowledge was the, as we already said, the strongest predictor of whether people would purchase it or not. They don't know enough about it, rather than they've never heard about it, was the largest reason. All right, what's next? Oh, one more thing. They went into a little bit more detail and said that the main reasons, aside from feeling like people didn't understand how it worked or know enough about it, was people quoted price volatility, and also people love to quote the uncertain regulatory outlook, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I guess moving on, I guess this transitions well, because going from Block to Jack Dorsey, it was just announced, I think yesterday, Jack Dorsey is stepping down from the board of Twitter. So a lot of us were expecting in, I believe, March, he said, or was it January, he was going to be stepping down as the CEO of Twitter, but he was supposed to remain on the board. And then I guess this is kind of a surprise announcement to me. He is stepping down from the board of Twitter completely. I'm guessing, speculating that it's to focus more of his time on Block and Bitcoin, and basically kind of doing what he said he wanted to do. I don't know where the deal remains with Elon trying to buy Twitter. I know that it was kind of held up. Obviously, the offer was on the table. They were going to reject it. Then they accepted it. Now it's going through, obviously, the regulatory
body. The update on that right now is Elon Musk changed his position size. The full offer of, I believe, 54.20 cents a share is still on the table, but his contribution went from something in the 20 millions to now 33 billion. Sorry, it's something in the 20 billions to now it's like 33 billion. That was as of yesterday.
P, you're muted again.
I'm kind of assuming that this Dorsey stuff is a combination of, he's going to spend more time at Block, but also I think he genuinely is starting to think that the deal with Elon is done, and he's going to just start moving on. Because I haven't seen anything about Twitter saying that they're going to replace him. It probably sends a signal to me that everyone's going to be off of. Everyone who's currently on the Twitter board is eventually going to not be on the Twitter board.
I could see Elon keeping Jack on personally. I think just from what I've seen, their interactions, they seem to have good rapport. I mean, Jack would probably be the one that he would leave on the board, in my opinion, but maybe Jack just wants to clean cut, let Elon do whatever he wants to do with the board.
Yeah.
There's also that rumor that Jack would come back as CEO.
I mean, yeah, it's possible. I have next to no basis for this opinion, but I'm going to state it as if it's a solid fact. I think Dorsey knew, he's been fighting the good fight for many, many, many years at Twitter. And I think he's tired of all the bullshit and has moved on to, I don't even want to say greener pastures, because that makes it sound like he's sort of fucking around. I think it's that Block represents something that all of us are, including him, are much more excited about. And his work in, Spiral, Block, the whole ecosystem there. And I think it's more likely that he's just choosing to focus all of his energy on that. Again, that's based on almost nothing. So do with that what you will. I'm also getting a message from Alex McShane saying Jack. Oh yeah. Jack has said specifically he will not be CEO again. Why would he want to be on a stick around and take the reputational hit and have to deal with all the psychological and moral burden of being part of a platform that is slowly sliding into the ocean? I think it was really amazing for a long time, and I think it has now become a bit of a cesspool. Anything else, or should we move on to the next topic?
Unless Q has anything else to add, we'll move on.
I need some sound effects. I've got a couple that are boring, but I want us to be able to be pa-ching, pa-ching, crazy shit happening all the time. Also graphics that fly across the screen. I want to be able to set myself on fire by hitting a button. Chris, can you make that happen?
Yeah, we can make it happen.
Right.
P, I love you. Not a conversation for live.
I mean, look, we're just here having fun. Let's do it.
I mean, look, to the 100 people who are out there watching, we hope you're enjoying today. And if you haven't already, go get your Bitcoin 2023 tickets. Yeah, see, like I'm with that. I'm so with that. I don't know why we don't do that more. But yeah, actually, if you haven't already, go get your Bitcoin 2023 tickets. Ticket prices have gone up. They'll be going up in about 2 weeks, I believe. Fair. Okay, you're right, Alex. No nos.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
and yes, and yes, and use promo code FOMO to get 10% off of everything in the Bitcoin Magazine store. Chris, do we have any more news stories for today?
Yeah, we have one more. So Tom Emmer, he's I believe out of Minnesota. He is I don't know if he's a congressman or senator. This is pretty bad, but congressman or senator out of Minnesota is trying to push legislation for no central bank digital currencies or CBDCs. And I'll just read his two tweets. The Financial Services Committee needs a reminder. Central bank digital currencies are a non-starter for the United States. Today, I introduced a bill prohibiting the Fed from issuing a central bank digital currency directly to individuals. And then he has the link to his bill. I believe it was a few pages long. I think it was just 2 pages long, to be honest. And basically
Isn't this
just
the bill that Kevin O'Leary brought up at the conference.
yes, it was. Yeah, because Kevin loved it because he's like, it's only 2 pages. You know, he's
Right,
holding it
yeah.
up and saying how great it was. I think Tom Emmer is on the Financial Services Committee. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know all the names, but I believe he's on the same committee with Cynthia Loomis, as well as a couple other senators and congressmen and women. If you guys want to riff on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm trying to pull up who else is on this committee, but it goes back to how much of a necessity you think things like stablecoin are for the growth of Bitcoin and the mass adoption of Bitcoin. And I'm still not convinced on the argument for why stablecoins need to exist, even for lower income areas. Like, yes, I sound like a privileged asshole that's been able to use the dollar my entire life, whereas like the rest of my family literally lives in a country that has hyperinflation of 100% in 2 years. I understand that they probably need something other than Bitcoin, and they probably need something other than a stablecoin as a solution. I just, you know how you've brought up the idea of like, I don't want the government to take an inch and then like they're going to keep that inch and then like further expand what they're going to do. And like, while this bill is 2 pages, like what happens when a bill gets introduced and makes its way through Congress? Every single congressperson has to like insert what they think they need for their constituents, but what really they're doing is inserting what's in the best interest of their donors. So while this bill is being introduced as a 2-page, very short, sweet to the point, like, do I think this is what gets voted on? No. Am I concerned that this could spiral into something much greater? Concerned, yes, only if it comes at an attack at the cost of an attack on Bitcoin. But it could also be beneficial to where it could lead to the opportunity of separating things like oranges, apples, and bananas in Bitcoin and stablecoin and crypto at large. So again, I've said this and I will always believe this. I don't like believing politicians. I don't believe their intentions are genuine ever. And I don't take this for what it is at face value, because I think there's a lot more hurdles in the way.
I think you're conflating central CBDCs, central bank controlled digital currencies, and stablecoins. I think those
You're
are
right. I 100% am. My bad.
Yeah, they're totally different things. And CBDCs, in my opinion, and I'm totally open to the idea that I'm missing some very important detail here, but I think of CBDCs as like Orwellian bullshit. And so I think it's great that we are potentially, banning them. I think there are utility uses, or as I understand it, and I don't pretend to understand the details, but I have been told by people that I respect that there are very strong, there's utility in stable coins for large swaths of the world, and so I take that at face value. But
what if I'm going big brain here? What if we ban central bank digital currencies, so the Fed is not allowed to issue a central bank digital currency right to the individuals, But with this regulation, it now opens the door for a cryptocurrency to offer a stablecoin that acts as a CBDC and sells the information and data of people using that network back to a government. I mean, we see that with social networks. We see that with all these big, large tech platforms. I mean, while you're saying you're stopping it doesn't mean you're actually going to stop it from happening. I don't know. That's just me going big brain, cosmic with it. What do you guys think?
I mean, I know how much you hate the state, Chris, but I'll entertain the idea that, oh yeah, we'll tell our citizens we're not going to do this, but like in reality, we'll still like experiment with whatever we want to experiment with. So
Yeah, I mean, if
like,
it's
like, go ahead, please. Sorry.
if it's possible to fuck people over, not from a perspective of like the government is not, for the most part, in certain cases it is like we are going to fuck everyone over, but that it is a mistake to ascribe menace to most people. And I think it's like an easy thing to be like, oh, they fucking hate you. The reality is, like, when the chips are down, when people feel like they have little choice, they will do whatever is going to benefit, or they believe is going to benefit them within the time frame. Some of these dogs are barking. Just
My bad.
they're angry at the state. They're going to do whatever they have to do to continue to, support themselves as individuals, the systems that they are part of, and the groups that they represent. And so the thing that is so powerful about Bitcoin and the layer 2 technologies that we're talking about here is that it makes it impossible to take advantage of people, or rather, it makes it much more difficult to take advantage of people in specific ways that are very, very common in our existing system. The most common of which is that is sort of in the milieu right now is creating inflation. I don't see an alternative. I don't think that the Fed, given the circumstances that we are currently in, can do anything but continue to print massive amounts of money. And I think that if we were in their shoes, if we were Christine Lagarde and were, an octogenarian who'd been sucking the blood of infants for years to maintain her longevity, we would, as individuals, probably make the same choices that she has. And I think that we just need to be investing in systems and investing in our own understanding of systems and our ability to use those systems that make it impossible for others to take advantage of us in those ways, or impossible for our data to be manipulated or used and collected in ways that are disadvantageous to us and the rest of the community. The ability of Bitcoin to allow us to be more sovereign is super important. I love to say Bitcoin is for enemies. That's not something I created. That's something that the community has created. And I think we need to embrace systems that are built around that ethos. We don't want to have to trust anybody. We want to be able to, don't trust, verify. And anything that requires more trust than you are willing to give should be disincentivized, in my opinion.
Chris, any final thoughts?
No, I think P said it pretty great. We'll wrap here.
Then on that note, get your Bitcoin 2023 tickets. Like, I don't know why you're waiting. You're dumb. You're going to have so much FOMO, and you're going to have to spend so much more money the longer you wait. So just buy it.
Also, get your Bitcoin off exchanges. Take custody of your own keys, not your coin. Educate yourselves. Always be educating yourself. Absorb as much information as you can.
And smoke a joint today. You've earned it. Stay humble, stack sats. Adios.